Hello and welcome to another episode of the Breathing Body Podcast. This podcast invites you to meet your body in a deeper and more meaningful way and to find your way back home. We explore tools and practices, share stories and experiences about how we can say yes to the body we inhabit. That's the most beautiful project life has to offer, and I call it self-love. And this podcast is for you, sister, to access an archive of inspiration and resources to find freedom in relation to food and your body. Healing through eating difficulties invites us to arrive in our body and give her a voice. And yes, this opens the space to live a life beyond your wildest dreams. My name is Flurina and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm an osteopath and a coach for women healing through eating difficulties. My background is in dance and yoga, and I'm based in London, where I practice, lecture and research. Today's episode is all about chocolate, fascia, and the spark of life. Yes, this is a deep, magic, and mysterious conversation. Just how recovering from eating difficulties can feel like, or at least it feels for me. And yes, this was such a meaningful conversation which reminded myself how I am so much more than my physical body. An emergent process of alchemy, as Joanne put it, today's guest. Maybe just 10% body and 90% spirits. It certainly left me feeling in awe for my body, for her, and I hope it does the same with you. So let me tell you a little bit more about today's guest. Joanne Avison is an author, illustrator, and specialist in fascia, myofascial movement, and manual therapy. It is actually through her book called Yoga, Fascia Anatomy and Movement that I got to know her. And I recommend you do read that book. It's absolutely fabulous. The by now second edition precedes a new illustrated series including Myofascial Magic in Action, Fasciategrity, the Magical Interface, the Heart-centred Embryo, and Somatic Archetypes. Through archetypal awareness, Joanne teaches how Fasciategrity redefines the unified nature of human form and self-expression through everyone's unique movement patterns. An ordained minister, Joanne's doctorate in spiritual science includes study and practice as teacher and practitioner of Restorative Yoga, Surat Shabd Yoga, structural integration and sacred contracts, archetypal patterns, and the movement of magical inner awareness. Joanne certainly invites us to tune into ourselves and understand our own biomotional intelligence from the inside out. During our conversation, Joanne shared how at present she spends most of her time traveling the world, working mainly with practitioners, teaching her work, and how she witnesses her students get confidence that there is nothing wrong with me. I am embodied. I am. She described this as watching light bulbs go on, a process of bringing ourselves home where the magic happens. And I so loved when she was sharing that. And of course, this is exactly what this podcast is about and what healing is about, coming back home and acknowledging the wholeness you are and have always been. I hope you will enjoy this episode, and I'm so much looking forward to hearing from you. What did you enjoy most about today's episode, and how did listening to Joanne sharing her story inspire yours. And if you do enjoy this episode, please leave a 5-star review, share it with all your friends and families. That's such a huge support. I send you lots of love and all the best. Welcome, hello everyone, and welcome, and a big hello, Joanne. Welcome on the podcast.
Hello, Flurina. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's such a lush pleasure to talk with you on this rainy Wednesday here in London. It's really rainy today, about the fascination of the human body. And yeah, this morning when I tuned into our conversation, I found myself sitting in my favorite coffee shop, drinking an oat flat white, and guess what? Eating a pain au chocolat. And whilst I was eating that pain au chocolat and tuning into that conversation, it was a no-brainer. Yes, that's where we need to start this conversation. So, Joanne, take us, I think it's around 4 centuries back, because you started your career, you tell us, but you started your, is it called work journey as a chocolatier? And tell us.
Well, first of all, just to be clear, it's not 4 centuries ago, because I'd love to be 400 years old. Actually, I don't think I would.
German mistake.
But 4 decades ago, yes. Yeah. For me, but the story goes back 4 centuries because of the anatomy. So you're completely forgiven for thinking the history of chocolate and using it the way we do today actually mimics the history of anatomy in certain ways. Because this is going to sound a bit bonkers, but let's just start in the middle and work our way out. That it's a bit like being in a labyrinth. You go out the way you came in. So we'll probably end with chocolate. But just to say, I began my life, I went to art school, and English and fine art were my subjects, and I always wanted to be an author and illustrator. Brackets of children's books, not grown-up books, but life and spirit had a different journey in store for me. So here I am. But at the age of 20, I met my future husband, who was a Belgian chocolatier and son of Belgian chocolatiers and grandson of Belgian chocolatiers. And so they had the genius, I have to say, of the chocolatier in the family bloodstream going back to the late 1800s. So it did go back, more than a century. And so I learned about chocolate by becoming a chocolatier under the sharp eye of my future mother-in-law, who was rigorous in how we learned to use the different textures, the different flavors, the different means of transforming it from liquid to solid, and all the things that you do. I didn't know, but life was teaching me about a liquid crystal matrix. I had no idea. I just thought I was learning to eventually run a chocolate factory, an artisan chocolate factory, and the artisan skills of the chocolatier, which are very refined because this is really important. We're going to translate this. This is a metaphor for us for understanding the human body and our embodiment. And that is that chocolate has what we call emergent properties. What do we mean by that? So several things are going on at once when you turn basically a bag of chocolate buttons into a beautiful Easter bunny with a ribbon round its neck that you can give a child to go, oh, look, there's my Easter bunny, or, a gift of chocolate. How often is chocolate thought of as a gift, as a sensory pleasure, as a delight? There are some people that hate chocolate, by the way. So for those of you that do, I'm sorry. But my own experience is it's often violently hated and mostly loved and appreciated. And even if you don't like it yourself, if somebody gives you a gift of chocolates at Christmas or comes for dinner and brings you a beautiful little treasure of artisan whatevers, even petit fours decorated with chocolate, or the ultimate chocolate cake, or the ultimate dessert, death by chocolate, because it's one of those sensory things that appeals. Not everybody likes it, but generally appeals in a sensory way at a visceral level.
Yes.
And this is quite an important point, because the fascia matrix of the human body is in fact a liquid crystal matrix. And what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, it means it's actually more like chocolate in terms of its behavior and its emergent properties, which I'll explain in a minute, than it ever is a machine. And the metaphor that we've been brought up with for the last 400 years, the last 4 centuries, is that of the mechanics of the human body. We literally call our movement facility biomechanics. There is nothing about us that is mechanical unless we've had a limb, in inverted commas, replaced by a biomechanical joint. And we end up going even deeper. We don't actually have separate joints. We don't actually have origins and insertions. They literally do not exist. We made it up as a metaphor to understand human body function. But we made a couple of great big huge mistakes. And we had some ignorance going on, because, our grandchildren are going to say, "Oh, Grandma," if they call me that, "you were so wrong about everything you said when you," because they're good. Do you know what I mean? We're tomorrow's food in that way. So given that everything I say is going to be wrong in 100 years' time, if not 10, and given that premise, let's look at what we mistook for meaning. We've applied a meaning that doesn't actually work, because the metaphor we're learning it under is the wrong metaphor. And that metaphor is that the human body functions mechanically, as René Descartes told us 400 years ago, like any other automaton. Now that really, Flurina, was got something that got lost in translation, because an automaton, autos in Latin means self, and an automaton was a self-motivated thing. So in those days, the clock, self-motivated. You don't stand there and turn the hands. You wind it up and let it do it by itself. And René Descartes used such metaphors to explain movement of something that didn't need to be moved. Autos means self, but the idea of self also got lost in translation, because the mind was given credit for the selfness.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that happened, and this we bring in the spiritual side, so I'm kind of bringing everything that you've said into one little sort of nugget that we can unravel. We can, what's the word? We can download and unfold as we go, because that's how we form. Is that, how can I say this in a way that makes absolute sense? The Industrial Revolution gave us this growing metaphor as we were learning. And René Descartes did not have permission formally, none of us did, the world didn't, have permission to formally dissect human bodies to understand movement, because it was sacrosanct.
Yes.
The human body was sacred. Hu is an ancient term for the divine in Sanskrit.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So human meant divine man. And womb-man came from womb, W-O-M-B, dash man, womb man. So mankind, kinder, kindred spirit, likeness to man, manna from heaven. These were all kind of linked words in our language, all what we call the etymology, the history of the language, all kind of this beautiful melange of words and origins. But basically, mankind was considered to be the highest being on earth, divine man, God as man, walking, because we're the only completely upright creature that transmits heaven to earth and expresses earth back to heaven. So we're the spiritual so-called conduit. And the head of all of that in the 1600s was the Pope.
Of course.
And the Roman Catholic Church dominated the culture. Now, whether or not you're Roman Catholic, we're not talking about religion here. What we're recognizing is the background of Western culture was based in a system, a hierarchical system of authority. And this is essential to understand, because if you didn't have sanction from the Pope, you weren't likely to flourish. So René Descartes went directly to him to get permission to dissect human bodies for human research. They probably didn't call it that, but for science. And Descartes is often dubbed the father of modern science. And the Pope gave this permission, and it's beautifully written about in the introduction to Dr. Candace Pert's book, Molecules of Emotion, where she says research scientists would rather share their toothbrushes than their research. So we were living in a world that we're still living in called divide and conquer. So you understood things by dividing them up and conquering them. So by going to the Pope and getting permission to divide up the human body posthumously, we could conquer our understanding of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And we have to forgive ourselves and our forefathers for this brilliant yearning for progress that we're still in. We're in the technological age, they were in the industrial age. But in that age, in that context, let's go back to them for really feel it. The language they used, the way they functioned was under the auspices of discovery, not of AI and technology, but of industrialization, of a machine that could do the washing. They were scrubbing on washboards. Of a machine that could communicate. I mean, we're 200 years before the telephone here. 1644 was the first printing press that didn't need handwritten. And just think about that for a moment. Every block, every letter was on a block that had to be put in reverse to print properly. 1644, we're in that era.
Wow.
So we haven't got telephones. The speed of a message is how long it takes someone to ride a horse or run or send smoke signals. You know, we can't imagine the lack of communication, the slowness of communication, and the reliance on intuitive communication. We don't know what that is, but this is a mystery then. So this is way, way, way long ago, hundreds of years ago. So the Pope gave this permission because they used Barbary apes up until that point. So a Barbary ape would be dissected to understand how a human moves. Now, our spines are very, very different. You know, in your studies, the human spine, that beautiful S that Leonardo da Vinci was the first to discover or draw in that way, because the Barbary apes that we use, their tailbone tends to be tucked under, their lumbar spine tends to be in a C-curve, which doesn't teach us about upright walking, doesn't teach us about fluid spinal movement. It doesn't teach us how we are. So we're still pursuing those questions now. And so were our forefathers. So in order to do that in a more accurate way, and it's, let me tell you, I still go to conferences where senior lecturers use pictures that were originally drawn from Barbary apes with straight lumbar spines. It wrecks my head.
Wow.
Because the distinction isn't made. And bless his heart, René Descartes was out there making this distinction and saying, please, can we have permission to dissect human bodies instead of Barbary apes, posthumously, obviously, for research, for science, in the name of, you know, the Lord, to look after this sacred being, the human. So he made a turf deal with the Pope, and I'm quoting Candace Pert now. And that turf deal was this, and this is great big huge. It's great big huge. You can have the body for science so long as the church retains jurisdiction for its own safety and sanctity over the soul, the spirit, the mind, the emotions, the feelings, the awareness.
Wow.
All the metaphysical aspects of being human. And we the church, will sanction your use of the body for science. Why do I say this is great, big, huge? Because a rift was driven in the divide and conquer style pursuit of science between the being and the body.
Yes.
We still live in that legacy.
Yes.
It's great, big, huge.
Two different things.
With two different worlds. And from that, we still study psychology, psychiatry, the psyche, meaning the soul. Psyche literally means soul. And the soma separately.
Wow. So that
you and I are body workers, Flurina. We have to say, no, I'm not a psychologist. I work in the physiology of the body. And our scope of practice has to be constrained by that appropriately. Is that not accurate?
Absolutely. I just want to say, wow, so I wasn't aware of that. So that moment you just mentioned there, where what the poet said, that was actually the moment where that split happened, which still, and then grew and grew and grew, and still exactly is so palpable and feelable. Foundational. Wow.
It's huge, because
it's huge,
you talk so much. You use the word embodied. Now, as a spiritual scientist, I'm like, well, which bit can't be embodied? I mean, we don't come into a yoga mat or get in our car or stand on our house. We don't leave our mind at our desk and our heart in with our kids and our bodies at the desk or on the mat. It's not how it works.
No.
Our spirit is all pervasive. Our beingness, you know, I live, what lives inside of me. My father, who passed years ago, lives inside of me. He lives in my heart, but not literally. You can't dissect my heart and find my dad, or at least you wouldn't recognize him. If you did, you wouldn't know what he looked like in my heart form. But he lives inside of me. So do all my family and all my friends and all the people I talk to and all my longings for the world. They live inside of me. And I spend a lot of time looking after that culture, being aware of it. You know, that's a spiritual practice, if you will, asking for the clearing, asking for all the assistance. God knows I need a lot of it, to just clear and clarify things. That's happening inside of me, but physically nobody but me and maybe spirit can see that.
Yes.
But what we've done is we've decided, if you like, that just the physical, the visible is there and there's nothing else there. So in my world, it's like, well, which bit of you isn't embodied? You can't not be embodied. You carry things in your heart, for sure. And, you know, anyone out there with loving members of family around them or not around them, they carry them with them to that yoga mat.
Absolutely.
And how do we self-regulate? Well, we self-regulate to be present, that we know they're there in the loving awareness. And when we sit on a yoga mat, we get on with our yoga. Or when you and I are in front of a client, we let the client take up the space. But we call on all our wisdom and everything that we carry inside of us to work with them from our experience and our embodied awareness.
Absolutely.
So I find myself saying, well, why do we have to say we're embodied? How can we not be?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm so glad that you say we cannot not embody, because isn't it a bit a thing that we all try so hard to embody our practice, and I include myself.
Me too.
And then I notice, wow, I try so hard to do something which is my flipping natural law anyway.
It's your default, sweetheart.
Absolutely.
You can't not do that.
Absolutely. And in a way, it takes off pressure. It immediately kind of demystifies. And whilst you were just saying what you said, it's made that big, wonderful question popped up in my heart and body, not in my mind. What does body mean? What is my body? That's the question which, interestingly, since Christmas, I have so much. I re-listened to some things of Jaap van der Wal. Of course, I start to think about what is my body.
We both adore him. We love you, Jaap, wherever you are.
We do. He's going to be on the podcast as well. I hope we are in touch. But anyway, exactly. We cannot not embody. So, yeah, do I now go off on a tantrum maybe, but maybe also not. Yeah. What in that relation, what is body? I want to ask you that. What is the best way to put it? Do I have a body?
Great question.
Do I inhabit a body? Do I journey through a body? Do I transition through a body? Do I land the body?
Well, it's a wonderful question. I'm not going to attempt to answer it. I don't have a clue is the truth.
What do you feel?
I love the mystery of
Yes.
it. My sense, okay, little side piece here, because we don't want to leave Descartes behind. And
No, we
maybe
don't.
we do. We love you, Descartes, but I just, left brain, let's say, very left-brained. I don't know that he was, but some of what he said got lost in translation. We won't forget Descartes. We'll come back. But to answer your question, in my world, and I'm not saying that it's the right world, and I'm not saying it's owned by me. It's the one I live in. Out of many, many, many years of training, devotion, and following my North Star, whatever that is that we get ourselves in a bit of a pickle because generally we think we're about 90% body and 10% spirit.
Yes.
And I think we're 90% spirit and 10% body. Our spirit's great, big, huge. It's universal. It's everywhere. And we have this conglomeration of cells. 3 things. I quote Jaap van der Waal in a beautiful dissection program we did that he was at. And I will never forget, he was standing at the front of the room and he said, your body contains 3 things. It's made up of 3 things. Cells, connective tissue, and the in-between. And the cells are made of connective tissue, and the connective tissue contains the cells, and the in-between of the cell wall and the connective tissue, and I'm paraphrasing him now, is a liquid crystal matrix, and it's all fascia. So for me, the fascia organizes, embodies, integrates, filtrates, infiltrates, handles, connects, distinguishes, holds the stuff of us.
Yes.
In place through which spirit can move and move us and be moved by us. So it's like the emergent properties I talked about in the chocolate.
Yes.
If the temperature's wrong, if the tempering is wrong, if the type of chocolate isn't appropriate for that temperature and tempering, and if the tempo that you move it at is wrong, all of the emergent properties, you'll just get a mess. It's gooey. But in order to perform what is actually an act of alchemy, which transforms chocolate beans into beautiful, loving gifts that you give your grandmother or your child or your friend or your teacher at the end of term or whatever, it's an alchemy. It's a process of emergent properties. And that's what we are, moment to moment to moment.
Wow.
And as embryos,
yes,
we self-organized from a unicellular being, to quote Jaap, who I adore. I just love and adore him. A unicellular being into a multicellular being, incorporating all those physical elements that we can see within the metaphysical beingness of us that is unified and distinguished by our archetypal patterns. And that's archetypal patterns of our being, our true personality, archetypal patterns of our soma, and the archetypal patterns of our social interactions. They're all distinct. Why do I say archetype? Here's the thing. Back to what we did at the beginning. René Descartes wanted, this is left-brained, the mechanical, separated distinctions of the stereotypical aspects of the human body, broken down into their component parts for this mechanistic view with a mechanistic, so-called biomechanical metaphor of how we function. So he described human motion as being like any other automaton.
yes,
Right brain, however, embodied wholeness, soft fluid integration, liquid crystal matrix. We need both combined. And what we did was divide them down the middle, and we kept the left brain story, and we abandoned the right brain left brain is stereotype, right brain is archetype. And we've become this, or we've accepted, not all of us, but we've accepted in our society a sort of a medical protocol, and we've done amazingly with it, let me add, a medical protocol of this mechanistic view.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense to all of us. And we're all saying, yes, but it doesn't make sense of my experience, and it doesn't make sense of what happens on my table, and it doesn't make sense of variability, and it doesn't make sense of the emergent properties of the moment. Yes, that's because you were never disembodied.
Yes.
You just think you were. And this is where I find we start going into difficult territory. So maybe we should come back to the body, because everybody has different beliefs, different religious beliefs, different spiritual beliefs. And we tend to hold on to our beliefs as the framework that makes sense for us. And I don't want to impose mine. That's what I'm really saying.
Wow. You said just so many, so wonderful, interesting things in a very dense amount of time. Let's unpack that a little bit more. I'm just thinking, on one level, I'd love to hear a bit more about, because you whispered you were never disembodied. And I would like to ask you, so tell us and all the listeners, what is in that case, what I feel our movement practice or whatever practice is about, to remembering something much more than finding something new. So maybe give let's first dive in there. What does that actually mean? We have never been disembodied. What is it, what we are invited to remember, and how can we do that? What are the questions we want to ask?
Well, okay. It's great, big, huge. So let's start. We're multidimensional beings. We're not unilateral. We're not there's nothing linear about us. We're non-linear biologic forms. Yes?
Yeah.
And we're essentially made of stardust. I know I sound like a lunatic, but the iron in your body that keeps you well and alive. I might be a lunatic. I don't think so. No. But anyhow, I think you've got to be a bit mad to have fun in life, and a bit maverick, but not lunatic necessarily. But that just means of the moon. So we're all influenced by it, by the way. So stardust. We're carbon-based bodies, and the iron in our bodies that keeps us alive is only sourced from stars. It's the only source. I'm not talking about the iron that's in your breakfast cereal, or the iron that forms a metal, or the iron that you get as a supplement. I'm talking about the iron in our bodies, in our bloodstream. It's from out there. And plus the fact, another very interesting thing from a spiritual point of view, is that we respire, we respirit. We cannot stop ourselves breathing. We can end our own lives in many, many ways, but suffocation isn't one of them, because your body, or something larger than you, your beingness probably, let's say, for example, your beingness you'll pass out before you can stop yourself breathing. So something other than you is breathing you. Something bigger than you, including you, is breathing you.
Yes.
We're breathing air as a community, whether we like it or not. We're breathing air courtesy of our atmosphere, our planet, something that we can be very destructive with, and we can be very constructive with, but we're being breathed. So we can receive the breath.
Yes.
And it's a reciprocal arrangement with the trees. We know that. They inhale our exhale, we inhale their exhale. So we know this. Our bodies know this. They've only ever known this. Our being knows this. Our awareness knows this, which is why breath practices are so common in all meditational practices and bodywork practices of embodiment. Strangely, we use this feature called breathing. In yoga, we call it pranayama. And a lot of people think prana means ways and prana means life force and yama means ways. So it's the way of the life force. But actually, pranayama comes from prana and ayama, which means expansion. So pranayama means expansion of life force. And we start there because we expand into the beingness that we all are part of. And I embody my being in a body, and you embody your being in a body, and you self-organized that in the moment of light, this spark of light that animated you as a unicellular being.
Wow.
And it was a light emission. And we've got gold standard peer-reviewed research about the fact that the fascia emits light, and to the extent that it's healthy, so its light emissions are shiny. And I think we think that's solely down to what we eat, what we do, and how much sun we get. And it's not. It's actually also a spiritual practice. And we can bring ourselves wherever we are. We say it, her whole face lit up when she saw me, or, oh my God, I'm so pleased to see you. We describe it as lighting up. Or someone might say to you, what's up today, Flurina? Your lights seem to have gone out, or you look a bit down. You look like you've got a shadow cast over you. So we actually speak light.
Yes, we speak light. Love that.
Yeah. The other thing, the way we're organized, is fascia emits or transmits sound. That's how it communicates through the body. So when you remember how you move, you are remembering, you are becoming a member of your own organization. You are remembering your beingness. And the moment you do that, the fact that you're alive is you're moving, and you're moving as a sign of being alive. You move to express that. Now, we have standards of movement. We have styles of movement. We have factions of movement. We have, it drives me crazy actually, because it's almost like religion, oh, no, I'm not a yoga teacher. I'm a Pilates teacher. No, I don't do yoga or Pilates. I'm a martial artist. Great. Oh, I'm a ballet dancer. We name ourselves, we identify ourselves with a movement practice. And I was talking to somebody yesterday who asked for some assistance with their master's degree in dance. Beautiful, beautiful young woman who described something to me. She said, when I'm dancing and I'm just being me, I have no idea where I am, what I'm doing. And she was trying to explain it. And what we came to was dancing is dancing through me.
Yes. Oh, yes.
These were her words, and I'm paraphrasing, when I am in front of my tutors and I've got to perform in a certain way, I'm actually dyspraxic. And as she said the label, she sort of rubber stamped herself and her lights dimmed. And she said, and I can't move the way I should. I feel all separate and disembodied. So she was using it as a word to say that she was trying to think her way through her movements as opposed to expressing them from within.
Yes. Yes.
And we talked about the label of dyspraxia or any other label. And we worked together at dissolving them and finding a kind of a confidence in her self-regulating. And a lovely thing to do is simply shake your hands. Just literally shake your hands and shake out whatever it is. Don't try and name it. Don't try and judge it. Don't believe it or disbelieve it. Don't make the person who told you it wrong. Just go, no, this isn't. No, can I just shake this out, please? And as you do that for a few moments, longer than 10 seconds, but not as long as 2 minutes, can you feel the tingling?
Yes.
It's remembering. That's a sound current running through your whole body. There you go. You just got it. You shut your eyes.
Wow.
You just remembered you. And that remembering is a recognition of embodiment.
What do you mean exactly with the sound current there? You said there is just a sound current flowing through your body.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, I can hear and feel it. It's like 3D, everything.
Yeah, it's multi-D. Yeah. It's multi-D.
Wow.
It's more than 3. It's moving through you, and something that moves through itself is at least 4D.
Thank you so much what you just all said now. So what I heard from what you said, because my question is, it's about remembering, and what is it about what we want to remember? What I've written down here is, wow, isn't it in a way too about rediscovering the spark within? And I loved that you reminded all of us that breathing, that pranayama, that there is the word of expansion in it. Because whenever I tune into the embryo, what touches me the most is that I call it how the embryo taught me or teaches me that original, my most ancient yes. There is this, without justifying, questioning, doubting, unfolding, expansive gesture to it. And then I think about how the first breath actually is not right when the baby, well, that's also me up when we get born, but when the lung buds start to sprout out, and
exactly
when that actually was the first breath, and that is expansion.
Completely. And think about it, even before then, the heart starts beating above the growing brain, above the crown. What's going to be the crown pushes the heart down. The heart feeds the growing brain, not the other way round. And as the crown grows, and of course this is in 361 degrees, this isn't in a linear forms, and it's impossible to see. You can only go into your imagination. But the heart actually starts as a blood island that begins to syncopate.
Absolutely.
Now that rhythmic syncopation, think of the tempo we talked about, the chocolate. We're using it as a metaphor. I'm not saying the body's made of chocolate. I'm saying we've used machines as a metaphor for 400 years. Let's use a liquid crystal as a metaphor, because at least we are a liquid crystal and we're not a machine. But imagine the heart beats above the growing brain, and that growth pushes the heart down in the round to a place in front of what's going to be the torso before it's even happened yet. And it syncopates the rhythm. So is that the first sound? Is that the first sound? Is that the original word in the beginning of, the book of Genesis? And I'm not going biblical on you.
I get goosebumps.
Exactly. The word is the sound. And then, of course, the light has to animate it. The embryo forms when the egg spins inside the corona radiata.
Yes.
What does that mean? The radiant crown. And then when the fertilization moment occurs, that crown, the light goes out. No, the light turns inward, and the sphere is sealed.
Yes.
So that the multiply and unite can take place, not divide and conquer. It goes from 1 to 2, from 2 to 4, from 4 to 8. It takes the shape and the form of the flower of life image that we all love, that contains the yin and yang image of Chinese medicine, that contains the flower of life image of every ancient wisdom.
Yes.
That's you. You did that. Your third multiplication of your original forming of the light and sound of the magic of you was originally, for 1 nanosecond, was that 8 ring inside a 9th enclosed form that holds the egg of life, the seed of life, that becomes the picture we know in 2D as the flower of life, as the tree of life. It's already in us. We don't just embody it; it embodies us. It's life force, and that geometry is how we form.
Yes.
And what happened in our history was that Sir Isaac Newton invented calculus for us to understand geometry and put it into a different language. And in that moment, it became exclusive, and we reduced our understanding of the human body to mechanics. There's nothing mechanical about you. There are no levers in nonlinear biologic forms, and I don't care how many classes of lever they use to describe and bend the metaphor. We're not mechanical, period.
Thank you so much for your clarity there. And just a little heads up for anyone who is listening and thinking, ooh, I didn't get anything about the embryo there. We will record a second episode, which will purely, if that is possible, dedicate to the embryo, which embodies us. So I won't go into more depth right today there, but that was an absolute wonderful teaser to listen to watch the space for that part 2. What I would like to do at this moment, if that's okay, Joanne, do you have a little bit more time?
I do, Flurina. I'm
Let's
delighted to be
go
here.
one more time back. So we started with the Belgian chocolate and how you're looking back in time actually learn how, wow, you've learned so fundamental principles or something really important there. But I would love to hear maybe take us back to that moment. What was the moment where you started to shift or melt from the chocolate world into the fascia world? And how did learning about the fascia, how do I need to put this question? Maybe already get it. How did learning about the fascia and really, how did it very pragmatically change the way you would move yourself, or you would teach movement, or you would do the body work?
Brilliant question.
We get to, I learned to speak fluent fascian.
Well, yeah, you want me to get to how I learned to speak fluent fascia. Well, it's just a story on a timeline, but it wasn't a linear process. So before my son was born, or perhaps while my son was born, so we're going back 30 years, and I had been a chocolatier for about 15 years by then, so I had another 5 to go, I think. No, maybe, anyway, whatever. Yeah, that's about right. I had incredible back pain and disorganization, pelvis, postpartum issues, and I literally couldn't lift up my newborn son and put him in the basket and put the basket in the car and put the car seatbelt on the basket, all the things that you do as a new mum. And I was in agony. And I had some physiotherapy, and they basically put me on a rack. They wrapped a belt around my hips and a belt around my ribs and unwound the table to stretch my spine.
Wow.
And I say it now, I can almost cry with the pain as I remember it, because although we don't recall pain, we don't remember the pain, but we recall the horror of it. And it was worse than childbirth, because at least I got my son at the end of the childbirth. All I had was more pain at the end of being stretched. And in actual fact, it's the same principle of heinous crimes in medieval times when people were hung, drawn and quartered. They effectively stretched them. So the word stretch is one of the bugs in my teaching, because we do not understand stretching. If stretching means a lot of things, just a little side piece, stretching means a lot of things to a lot of people. And we talk about a stretch of road or stretching our thinking or whatever. And it does mean in some ways, to expand. And healthy stretching is fabulous, and a lot of stretching is not healthy. And I don't mean stretching a lot is not healthy. I mean a lot of stretching that we're taught is supremely unhealthy to human structure. But that's worthy of another whole podcast.
Yes.
We're not going there. I found out the hard way, and I was literally in pieces. It broke me. It tore me down. And I went in search of ways to work, and a combination of movement and of subtle restorative yoga. And one of the people I worked with, very luckily, was John Stirk, a wonderful man. And if you haven't done a podcast with him, do one, an osteopath. And I was trained by 2 osteopaths, actually, John Stirk and Peter Blackaby, way back when. And so I was trained in yoga through osteopathy, and that's where I first learned about fascia. And then I restored myself. I became a lovely, strong, healthy mum, as opposed to one that could barely walk or lift my son. And I was able to walk with my toddler on my shoulders and get really fit and healthy, which was wonderful. And but I had quite a maverick approach to the yoga, because I found out it was my hypermobility that made me good at yoga, but that also invited me into bigger problems when I didn't understand it. So I was full of all these questions about how the human structure really works. In 1998, I met Tom Myers, and I trained with him and became one of his teachers. And I thought Anatomy Trains was an incredible way of getting the body from bits to bands. And then I did a lot of human dissection, and I was able to discover that the anatomy trains were carved, not revealed. Another great big huge statement.
Yes.
And they are a metaphor for getting us from bits to bands. So yes, we're all joined up from head to toe, but we're not divided as a front, a back, a side, a spiral, and a deep. Sorry. That's number one. And number two, Tom is the first to say anatomy trains is a metaphor, not a method. So we use it metaphorically, and it's still a train. I did a course in planes, trains, and automobility because we have to remember it's a metaphor and that we have to move on, because metaphors give us to something. We can't, the same with the chocolate, we're using it to get to something, to get to a deeper awareness. But we are not made in lines and bands and slings. So we've gone from bits to bands. We have to get to beings. And this is where your question, crux, comes in. I met Dr. Stephen Levin, and I started to learn about biotensegrity. And we went very, very deep on that structure. And I went very, very deep on that sacred geometry. And then I looped back to my art history where I studied Leonardo da Vinci. And I realized that he had actually understood all these keys to human structure. And I was, funnily enough, having an argument one day with an osteopath. And I met Jaap van der Waal because of my love of chocolate. Another delightful story where he literally got down on his knees to me when he found out I was a chocolatier. It was so funny.
That's wonderful.
And his very dear friend, Leonid Blyum, who works with children with cerebral palsy, and another amazing practitioner. Leonid and I were in the room with an osteopath and Dr. Levin, and the osteopath was explaining bending moment at the human knee in very graphic biomechanical terms. And getting cross with me because I didn't understand it. And bless her, she did this whole beautiful explanation, and I just sat there. And she said, "Do you get it now?" And I said, "It can't be right." And she said, "Why not?" I said, "Because it can't. I don't know why. It's wrong. It's not how human bodies move. They don't do that," which is as good as I got. I couldn't match her technical brilliance or her years of study of biomechanics. I'd studied plenty, but it still didn't make any sense to me. And she looked at Dr. Levin and said, "Will you please tell her she's wrong and explain why?" Like I was the idiot in the room, which I perfectly accept because I can be a complete idiot. And Dr. Levin smiled and said, "Well, she's right, but she doesn't know why."
Wow.
And Dr. Levin explained why there is no bending moment at the human knee, because it's not a joint in that way. It's a continuum. And the anterior cruciate ligament and the posterior cruciate ligament are actually one spiraled tubular spiral, which is complex but provable. And I sat there and I just said, I was rocking in my chair in horror. And I said, "Look, I don't want to make you wrong and me right, or me wrong and you right. This isn't about right and wrong. This is about uniting our understanding. Why do I know in my bones that it's not right? It's not human." And Leonid said to me, "Because you were a chocolatier for 20 years and you were up to your elbows in a liquid crystal matrix every single day, and you understand liquid crystal matrices, and your fascia speaks fascia." And in that moment, I understood why life put me on the path that I've done, which you can't make up. It's so nuts. And I just went, "Thank you, Leonid." So thanks to Leonid, I understand chocolate. I went back to the chocolate, went back to my, by then, ex-husband and said, "Please, will you go through how we make chocolate because we're friends and show me blah, 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 blah." And we went through all the seed crystals and how the chocolate works. And it's just fascinating. So that's a future thing. And of course, and that's how I wrote my book. And that's how the mystery of how connective tissue works, like seed crystallization, is self-organizing. It's a self-organizing structural thing. So by that time, I was a body worker. I'd been trained by Tom Myers as well as a movement teacher. And so I started to integrate the two, and then I was commissioned to write Yoga, Fascia Anatomy and Movement and put it all together. And the rest is history. I've just gone around the world working with practitioners, reminding them who and how they are. And mostly what happens, Flurina, is people get this incredible confidence that there's nothing wrong with me. I am embodied. I can do this. And whatever their movement protocol, whatever their manual practice, we can enhance it because the logic behind it makes sense to them, of them.
Yes.
And so they recognize themselves and they have status because they get that, they get it. And usually what happens is it's like watching light bulbs go on. But I knew that. I heard that. I saw that. I felt that. And you're going, exactly. And so we bring ourselves home. And then, of course, we're self-regulated. And then when we're working with our clients, we co-regulate. And the magic happens. And it is magic.
Wow.
It's literally magic.
That is so wonderful. Thank you. Do you have, Joanne, maybe a very, it's difficult, I know, but a very concrete impulse or question for all the listeners who are about to go to move after, or for the morning practice tomorrow, or will see a client in the afternoon? What is a starting point through which we can engage with that fluid, crystalline, connecting, spirited matrix the fascia actually is?
Well, I think it is I think it's the spiritual interface of our being with our body, and it's how our body expresses our being and how our being expresses itself through our body, because gesture is actually our primary self-expression. So the first thing would be what I said to you before, simply shake your hands. So that brings you present, and then you can listen, and then you can hear that. You don't have to know what it is. The other thing you can know is that your fascia is the largest sensory organ of the body.
Yes.
So it's actually sensing you anyway. It works 24/7. And to sense it, this is what I do. First thing I do is a yawning stretch. Pandiculation is a gorgeous yawn. Wake up in the morning and find our elbows and our wrists and our shoulders and our knees and our feet and our heels and our ankles, and just wiggle and yawn. Why do we yawn? Because we are decelerating the tissue at the same time. So we're not just stretching and then going beyond stretch to stretch more. We're decelerating. So it's a very appropriate action for the body. And then after a few easy breaths, comfortable, easy breaths, just however you want to do them, what I do is I circle my wrists and my ankles, because the wrists are the key to the neck and the ankles are the key to the pelvis. And so we get this absolutely gorgeous, subtle build of awareness. We're actually designed to rebound and release and recoil and so on. And what we do is we unstick the sticky bits. And if we do it with the wrist, it informs the neck. If we do it with the ankles, it informs the pelvis, and the neck and the sacrum and cervical spine talk to each other. And that's all you need to do. You'll feel much better.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful. We start with the chocolate and the sensory pleasure. And now we actually did do a circle, and now we ended up with you giving us such a mystic and yet concrete impulse, how we can start to engage that sensorium, which is the same. I mean, if we each other move, we engage with that. Wow. I feel it's interesting. I was just thinking, I feel with loving clarity from your side, also a little bit kind of unwrapped or splashed from anew, which is a great place, right? I feel we need to be splashed over and over again to notice. That's what I think I know, and actually there is so much more to just feel and sense into and to explore and to remember that I already am embodying it. So you helped me to remember that place too. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'm sure I will get some also feedbacks and questions from listeners. And yes, Joanne will be back. And I'm
happy to answer them as well. Please forward them to me and I will answer and respond. Yeah.
Yes, I'll do that. and maybe before I will obviously put all your details into the show notes, but maybe take a minute and share. That's always the best. What are ways to work with you? How can people reach out to you or learn more from you?
Thank you. That's lovely of you to ask. So I have a course. I currently have 2 courses in the world. One is the Hunter Academy. I teach fascia mastery for yoga teachers. So that's based in yoga. And the other course I work with Paul Thornley. It's called MMIA. It's Myofascial Magic in Action. Secretly, it stands for the Movement of Magical Inner Awareness, but that's informal. That's just between you and me and your listeners. And it's fabulous. We hold your hand through that. It's coaching every week. We teach you the 5 R's of Myofascial Magic, which are rebound, recoil, release, restore, and refine. And we actually teach you how, within your own practice, whatever you're already doing as a manual or a movement practitioner, whatever, it's like having the magic ingredients to make the delicious sauce on what you're doing, and how to read other people and then inform them within your practice. We kind of join the dots. It's the in-between.
Wow.
And I work with Paul, and I call him the Gordon Ramsay of movement master chefs, because he's genius, frankly. And together we work with everyone literally every week for 3 to 6 months, depending on the level of their engagement. Yeah, so it's quite a high coaching, but let's get you out there full of confidence, full of magic, and making a difference to people without changing your repertoire, but joining the dots differently and thinking differently, and not being lost in biomechanics, but bioemotional, or biomotional as I call it, biomotional integrity.
I want to sign up for that course.
We'd be delighted to have you. Listen, we need to get this work out in the world.
Yes,
I can't do it on my own.
That's why we are now here. And that's why this is the promise, you will come back.
And I hope you'll come and be a guest on my podcast too,
I would
Flurina,
be delighted to. I would be delighted to.
Thank you.
Wow, what a wonderful, slightly challenging, deep, magic and mysterious and just nurturing episode. I so much enjoyed talking to Joanne, and I felt, as I said in the beginning, reminded about the fact that there is so much more to explore about that phenomenon. And what is our body? That's probably the question we are all left with. What does your body mean to you, and who is she? And that's very much the question I do send you off your way. And what is left to say, I so hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I'm thrilled and looking forward to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram, Flurina_breathing_body. You can leave a comment, feedback here on whatever platform you're listening from. I always enjoy to interact and to be in touch with you and to nurture this breathing body community. Thank you, and I wish you a beautiful spring, a spring into self-love and the wholeness you are. Take good care and lots of love.